The galaxy, for all its shimmering nebulae and ancient civilizations, runs on paperwork. Not the quaint tree pulp kind humans once cursed in offices, but the digital, quantum-encrypted, multi-species form that requires three signatures, a retinal scan, and, if you're dealing with the Jari, an interpretive dance. At the top of this bureaucratic food chain sits the Galactic Council, a body so venerable it has forgotten why it was formed in the first place. Its members like to think of themselves as the embodiment of wisdom, though most of their wisdom consists of knowing which committee to send a problem to so it can be quietly ignored for a century. One of their proudest inventions is the doctrine of merciful resolution. This is mercy as defined by species who have never actually felt it, mercy as a legal construct, stripped of sentiment, wrapped in procedure. The Council's version of compassion is to stop short of annihilation, but only just. A defeated enemy is left with enough resources to limp along, ideally too weak to retaliate, but too alive to inspire sympathy. The system works, in the same way a rusty airlock works, technically functional, but you wouldn't want to test it in a storm. Into this well-oiled machinery stumbled humanity, the newest member species, admitted less out of enthusiasm than necessity. Humans were unpredictable, impulsive, and far too comfortable with improvisation. The Council viewed them the way one might view a pet that had learned to open doors, amusing but potentially catastrophic. Still, someone decided to give them a low-stakes assignment: mediate a post-war settlement between the Krixar and the Varathi. The Krixar, a reptilian species with a cultural fondness for conquest, had just been humiliated by the smaller, more agile Varathi. By council law, the Varathi were required to offer the Krixar a merciful resolution, strip them of strategic assets, dismantle their fleets, and leave them just enough industry to produce ceremonial armor and bitter memoirs. The humans were there to ensure the process followed protocol. The council thought this was safe. They were wrong. Captain Elara Vance, the human envoy, listened patiently as the Varathi outlined the standard mercy package. She nodded at the right moments, asked a few clarifying questions, and then, without warning, threw the entire plan out the nearest metaphorical airlock. Instead of enforcing the council's formula, she proposed something else. The Krixar would not only keep their remaining infrastructure, but receive additional resources from the Varathi to rebuild faster than before. Trade routes would be opened, tariffs reduced, and joint industrial projects launched. It was, by galactic standards, the equivalent of losing a fistfight and being handed a gift basket. The Varathi delegation froze. The Krixar delegation blinked in unison, which for them was the cultural equivalent of fainting. And somewhere in the council's observation chamber, a dozen species collectively decided the humans had finally revealed their true nature. Dangerously naive or dangerously cunning, possibly both. The Krixar accepted, of course. Suspicion radiated from them like heat from a star, but they accepted. The Varathi, bound by the mediation agreement, reluctantly agreed as well. The council, however, was apoplectic. Mercy was supposed to be a leash, not a ladder. An emergency hearing was called before the ink. Well, the quantum-sealed data was dry. The council chamber is a grand, echoing amphitheater designed by a species that believed intimidation was best achieved through architecture. The seats are arranged in concentric tiers, each one slightly too close to the next, ensuring that personal space is more theory than practice. The acoustics are terrible, amplifying every cough, hiss, and mandible click into something that sounds like a minor disaster. Captain Vance stood at the center, a single human in a circle of hundreds of alien eyes, lenses, and sensory fronds. The speaker, a towering insectoid with a voice like grinding stone, demanded an explanation. Why had she violated the doctrine? Why had she given the Krixar more than they had before? Did she not understand the risks? Vance's reply was calm, almost casual. Humans, she explained, have a different definition of mercy. In human history, leaving a defeated enemy destitute often guaranteed future conflict. The surest way to prevent revenge was to remove the desire for it entirely. Give them a stake in peace, and they might just keep it. She cited examples from Earth's past, how after the Second World War, The United States had rebuilt its former enemies into prosperous allies. It wasn't altruism, she admitted. It was strategy. It's harder to stab someone, she said, when you're busy trading with them. The chamber buzzed with confusion. For most council species, revenge was as inevitable as gravity. Generosity after victory was weakness. Worse, it was illogical. The speaker accused her of recklessness. Vance simply shrugged and said, "We call it Tuesday." The council adjourned in a state of dignified outrage, fully expecting the Krixar to exploit the generosity and launch another war within a decade. But days later, something unprecedented happened. The Krixar sent a message, not to the Varathi, but to the entire council. They announced their intention to join a trade alliance with their former enemy. They spoke of mutual prosperity, cultural exchange, and the human path to stability. The Krixar leader, a being whose public statements usually consisted of threats and victory chants, thanked the humans for showing them a future without the shadow of vengeance. It was the first recorded instance of the Krixar thanking anyone for anything, including their own hatch mothers. The council was stunned. Their carefully calibrated mercy had never produced such results. Some members began to question whether their traditions were as wise as they believed. Others muttered that this was a dangerous precedent, that generosity could not be allowed to replace control. Officially, the council declared the human method an interesting anomaly and recommended it never be repeated without oversight. Unofficially, they began assigning humans to more mediation roles, and so the galaxy learned a lesson it wasn't quite ready to admit. Sometimes the shortest path to peace is paved with generosity, not fear. The council still calls it reckless. Humans still call it Tuesday. And somewhere, in a subcommittee meeting that has already lasted 6 hours, they are still debating the most humane way to vaporize prisoners. Progress, as always, is slow. The real entertainment began not in the council chamber, but in the corridors afterward. Diplomats from half a dozen species cornered Vance with questions that ranged from incredulous to borderline panicked. A feline-faced Tarvek ambassador demanded to know if this generosity doctrine was some kind of covert human weapon. A gelatinous envoy from the Thrill asked, in a voice like bubbling syrup, whether humans had developed a technology that forced enemies to like them. Vance, with the patience of someone who had been through airport security in 3 different centuries, assured them that no, it was just how humans operated. This only made them more suspicious. Back on Earth's orbital embassy station, the human delegation received a flood of encrypted messages from species they'd barely spoken to before. Some were curious, some were quietly desperate. A few wanted to know if humans could mediate their own centuries-old grudges, preferably in exchange for mutually beneficial mineral rights. The sudden popularity was unsettling. Humanity had been in the council for less than a decade, and already they were being treated like a rare and possibly dangerous spice, delightful in small doses, potentially lethal in excess. Meanwhile, the Krixar wasted no time in capitalizing on their new relationship with the Varathi. Joint shipyards sprang up in neutral systems. Cultural envoys exchanged recipes, military cadets, and, most shockingly, jokes. The first time a Krixar comedian performed in a Varathi city, the council's cultural monitors nearly had a collective aneurysm. The jokes were terrible, but the laughter was genuine, and that was far more destabilizing to the old order than any warship. The council's intelligence arm began compiling reports on human-style mercy as if it were a classified weapon. Analysts debated whether it was sustainable or merely a fluke born of peculiar Krixar psychology. The more paranoid factions suspected a long con. Give your enemies everything they want until they forget how to fight, then take it all back. Humans, for their part, didn't bother correcting them. Let the galaxy guess. It was easier than explaining that not every move was part of a grand plan. Vance herself became a reluctant celebrity. Her face appeared on news feeds across 3 spiral arms, often accompanied by headlines that translated roughly to "The Dangerous Kindness of Earth" or "Ambassador of Madness." She ignored most of it, preferring to focus on the next assignment. The council, still pretending they disapproved, quietly sent her to mediate a brewing dispute between 2 mining clans in the rimward sectors. The official reason was her experience with unconventional resolutions. The unofficial reason was that no one else wanted to deal with two species whose mating rituals doubled as territorial negotiations. In private, a few council members admitted, never on record, that the humans might be onto something. Peace born of fear was brittle. Peace born of shared interest might actually last. But admitting that would mean rewriting centuries of doctrine, and the council would rather schedule another century of debate than do that. As for the Krixar, they continued to surprise everyone. Their trade alliance with the Virathi expanded into joint exploration missions. One expedition even invited a human crew member, ostensibly for cultural exchange, though most suspected it was to see if proximity to humans really did cause this baffling outbreak of cooperation. The reports from that mission remain classified, but the rumors suggest the Krixar captain returned with a human recipe for chili and a deep suspicion that it was a form of chemical warfare. In the end, the galaxy didn't change overnight. Old grudges still simmered, old powers still clung to their rules, and the council still moved at the speed of erosion. But somewhere in the archives, a new case study began circulating, one that suggested mercy could be more than a leash. It could be a bridge. And though most species dismissed it as a dangerous anomaly, a few quietly began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, the humans weren't mad after all. Of course, they were, just not in the way anyone expected.